Welcome back to WINN Tucson. I have been looking forward to this interview all weekend long. It is with Scot Mussi, and Arizona Free Enterprise released a report on Friday after I think I got off the air, or maybe while I was on the air, and I didn't get to jump on it then. But Scot, thanks for joining me today. But this report is about Arizona's Liberal NGO Syndicate, organized crime, and basically how the Democrats have been benefiting from funding from George Soros and others. And it's not a two-page report. It's got so much information. And how long I'm just curious. Why do you feel it was important right now to publish this, and what should listeners understand right out of the gate? And welcome, by the way, friend.
Thanks, Kathleen, for having me. Yeah, we released the report late last week on Friday, and it's something that we've been working on here at the Arizona Free Enterprise Club for several months this year, and it is something actually that we've monitored for several years, but this report's been several months in the works and heavy research to do it. And the impetus was back when Trump was being inaugurated, and the discussions then, and what came to light related to the use of taxpayer funds through USAID and other sources, taxpayers funding nonprofit organizations and NGOs, not just around the world, but here in the United States, to engage in various left-wing activity. And so we already knew that many of the organizations on the left here in Arizona that have been operating for several years were heavily funded by out-of-state sources. So we were curious about the taxpayer element, and then just do an update. How extensive is this network in Arizona? So after several months of research, what we released is the culmination of that report. And what it identifies is that there is a vast network of over 180 different transactions among dozens and dozens of different groups, where you'll see not just tens of millions, but actually hundreds of millions flowing to liberal organizations operating in Arizona, specifically designed to flip Arizona blue. I mean, that's the purpose and intent of this network, this syndicate of liberal NGO groups. And yes, these NGO groups are receiving taxpayer funds. One of the ones we highlight in the report is funding from USAID in past years that have flowed to these various, what we call intermediaries. These are the various national NGOs that then get passed along to groups operating here in Arizona.
Well, and I think this report is so great. So if people want to get the report, how do they do that, Scot?
They could visit our website, go to www.azfree.org, or they can visit our social media pages on Facebook or X as well. The full report's been posted on both of our social media pages there, and on Instagram as well too. So, but if you want to just download the report, you can go to azfree.org.
Thank you, and I'm going to remind people again, because I think when they hear what you have to say. You're saying taxpayer dollars were being used against us, basically, for ballot measures, for paying off the media, fake news, I guess, lawfare, all these lawsuits that there were, and you put democracy in quotes here, and then open borders. So all of those things, and we know the open borders brought in millions of people. At a high level, what did your research uncover about how political nonprofits are operating specifically in Arizona today?
How we broke this down is that we broke it down in the where the sources of revenue originate from, how they flow to what we call the intermediaries, which are kind of the pass-through groups that are used to take in this funding, and then finally the end result, how they get passed on to those different organizations, and as you described it, the various activities that they're engaging in it. And to be clear about one thing, so that your listeners understand how this kind of works, is that these types of organizations are organized as either 501c3s, which are tax-deductible organizations under the IRS code. They're considered philanthropic,
yes,
and are tax deductible. And then you have 501c4s, which are social welfare organizations. They're part of the network as well. Contributions to those particular groups are not tax deductible. And so what you'll see is that much of this money flows through, and some of the big name people that you often hear about, George Soros and others, are huge originators of these funding sources. Many of these liberal billionaires utilize what are called donor-advised funds. What those are basically financial institutions that set up special funds that donors can contribute to, and then use that as a way to donate to tax-deductible NGOs or non-governmental organizations. And so many liberal billionaires will give money to these DAFs, these donor-advised funds. In our report, we identified about $1 billion that flowed to these DAFs that then go to various intermediaries and flow down. And then finally, as an origination of sources, is taxpayer funds. It was interesting, the beginning of this year, after Trump was inaugurated and he began his border crackdown, we immediately saw these new groups popping up in Arizona to oppose the border crackdown. And it was groups that we had never heard of before.
Right.
And when we started digging around and looking at them, lo and behold, they were part of this network. And then after a little bit more research, quickly discovered that, yes, many of these groups were being funded by many of the same NGOs that were receiving taxpayer money and funding from USAID.
I have to ask, since I live down here, is there any connection between those groups and our newly elected Congresswoman, Adelita Grijalva, because she's been attacking ICE agents, although she'll say that they're attacking her, and she's been fighting against the illegal immigration efforts to remove illegal residents here from the state?
We would almost guarantee that many of the major organizations, and just to highlight a few of the big, the Arizona-based groups that are operating, whether it be Mi Familia Vota, Lucha, probably the big one down in southern Arizona that was supporting her, Chispa, which is based in Tucson. They're a seven-figure, well-funded group that is a 501c3, so they're tax deductible. But they also often in every election cycle, in fact, in 2024, spent millions of dollars on Arizona candidate races as well, too. And so no doubt that these groups were active in the last cycle. And given their track record, I have no doubt that they were supporting Grijalva and her campaign as well, too, in Tucson.
Okay, thanks. You think you know something anecdotally, but obviously you've got the facts to back it up, which makes it a much stronger argument. Scott, I looked at what's happened to Colorado, Nevada, California. They all used to be red states. New Mexico's always been a tinge blue and is blue, but Arizona seems to be the focal point for this activity. We've been a target, and other than the border, why is our state such a major target for the national political organizations?
Make no mistake, this is a national coordinated strategy by the left. And you mentioned one of the states, Colorado. That was actually the first state where this new model was deployed. And the idea being that historically, pre-2005, most political activity flowed through the political parties. Outside groups or NGOs played a role, but they were a much smaller role compared to the political parties. Well, in Colorado, that was the first state where you had some Colorado liberal billionaires that decided to fund these various NGO-type groups, and were wildly successful in doing it, to the point that they flipped Colorado blue. In fact, there was an entire book written about it,
right,
called The Blueprint. And The Blueprint. After that, national groups were organized to coordinate this strategy in various states to help fund state-based NGOs to flip states blue. And the biggest organization doing this, the biggest entity doing this, was one that most people never heard of before. It's called Arabella Advisors.
George
and
Soros,
that's
right?
an entity that receives billions of dollars each campaign cycle. And all they do is go out and help organize and fund and coordinate campaigns, build infrastructure in states like Arizona to flip them blue. And that's what we were seeing. And we started seeing this activity popping up about 10 years ago in Arizona. Prior to that, there wasn't really any sort of organized strategy or structure. That all changed in 2015, 2016, and we saw this explosion of far-left NGOs popping up around Arizona, engaging this activity. And probably the one thing that everyone needs to be aware of is that these organizations are almost 100% funded by this network, funded by out-of-state resources. This is not an in-state funded endeavor. This is an out-of-state endeavor, pouring money to do these different activities. And all the things you highlighted, lawfare, trying to litigate and stop laws passed by a Republican legislature, fake news media outlets that are created here in Arizona, grassroots organization, community organization on the ground, that's running year-round, nonstop, 365 days a year, all built together, then to be used to influence and change the outcome of elections.
Scott, I got to take a quick break. Can I get you to stay with me? And because I have like a bazillion more questions, if it's okay with you.
Absolutely, Kathleen.
Okay, great. Thank you. We're talking to Scot Mussi from Arizona Free Enterprise, who just did this comprehensive study to prove what we knew was happening. And I want to know where we go next, because with this data, we should be able to get the corruption out of Arizona elections. Now more than ever, it's so critical. So you are listening to 1030 The Voice, your trusted local news and talk. I'm Kathleen Winn. This is WINN Tucson. Stay with me, and Scott will be back on the other side of this brief commercial break. Welcome back to WINN Tucson with my brilliant friend, Scot Mussi from the Arizona Free Enterprise. Scott, I have like so many questions. So we have an election coming up next year that is, I believe, critical for the life of the state. I don't want to be dramatic, but I do believe that we have to understand this report and the significance of it. So this isn't just typical campaigning, traditional campaigning. What makes this nonprofit network different from that?
Well, I think what it is, and I think probably the first thing that most people need to be aware of, especially people here in Arizona, is, again, none of this was by accident, and this is a coordinated, sophisticated syndicate being used by the left here in Arizona, and it's large amounts of resources being used to try to accomplish that particular goal, and that Arizona taxpayers in downstream are paying for this because it's getting funneled through this system. And so the first thing about it would be that understanding and knowing what's going on, and then from there, what can be done to combat this. The good news is, I would say at this point right now, is that the Trump administration, many of the steps they've taken since they have come back in on last January, is both through the Department of Justice, also through actions through DOGE and others, that some of the taxpayer-funded revenue streams like USAID have been cut off from this philanthropic liberal network. And so,
do you know what the bottom line is on that, Scott? Like how much of that was making its way into Arizona races from USAID? Do we know?
Well, for funding the network itself, we identified over $50 million last campaign cycle going to the various intermediaries. Okay. And this is the game they play, is that what you'll see is that it's by design. This is intentionally opaque. They want to create this as complicated as possible. All these liberal NGOs, right, they're organized. The financial transactions are complex. We identified over 180 different transactions, large transactions being circulated through this vast network, and purposefully, because what they want to do is they don't want people to easily identify the the USAID money flowing directly to one particular group. And so what they do is they'll
diversify,
commingle funds, put it into a big pot, and then distribute the funds out. And so through that, we identified over 50 million last cycle that went to the intermediaries that eventually flowed money down to these various Arizona NGO groups operating here in Arizona. And as I mentioned before, some of this is going to be election-oriented, like get out the vote efforts, GOTV, what we call the fake media, the funding of fake 501c3 news outlets, even to the point, and we haven't checked at least for the news outlets down in Tucson, but we do know with AZ Central that if you look at many of the reporters that are, quote, working for AZ Central, they're not actually working for the paper. They work for foundations. And the foundations loan those reporters to companies like Gannett and others to do reporting for them and to write articles for them. And if you go to the bottom of the news article, you'll actually see a tagline that says, "Oh, this report was provided by a journalist paid for by a foundation within this liberal infrastructure network."
Can every time we have one of those, is there a way to just track it through AI or something so that we know not, so that people don't believe what's there? Because it's clearly a bought and paid for. It's like an ad. It appears to be a news story, correct?
It pretty much is operating that way. Many of these philanthropic outlets, and a lot of times they have a tagline that they are the reporting on climate justice or whatever.
Well, that probably would give it away for our team.
Doing.
Yes,
but they'll put the tagline at the bottom and identify that the funding for that particular news article was from some 501c3 foundation, and so that's the activity. And so the first is awareness, and then the second part of this is that from an Arizona perspective, it just means that we need to be vigilant and make sure that we're doing everything we can from our own perspective to educate and inform voters from the conservative side, and that's the role that we want to play, and make sure that everybody is on the same page, that we need to be supporting and doing everything we can to push back on this.
Well, I think we're really good at telling people, like Arizona Mirror or it was some of these others, One Arizona and Copper Courier, and you mentioned Lusa. I don't know about Ace, and we're not talking about Ace Hardware, CRISPA, and I think that's great. There was a quote I just wanted to say. It's your quote, but this isn't activism. It's a professional, tax-advantaged political operation designed to look local, but controlled from afar. Arizona isn't changing; it's being engineered. Conservatives need a clear roadmap, strong counter infrastructure, and strategic engagement to protect the state's future and preserve local control. How do we do that, Scott? That's my question. How do we do that? You're 100% right.
And it's the two prominent ways are, one, the activities that we're seeing that the Trump administration is doing related to the crackdown through the Department of Justice on funding not just left-wing activity, but violent activity through tax-advantaged groups that you can receive a tax deduction from. I think that's critically important. The activities you see as far as the investigations into entities like Act Blue at the national level, and then cutting off the taxpayer funding at the federal level. At the state level here, the two most important things that we can do, one is recognize that we can go out and make sure that we are supporting and backing our own nonprofits that are truly Arizona-based, that are truly Arizona-focused, that aren't this fake AstroTurf. And so, we're proud that we have over 15,000 grassroots activists, real Arizonans that support the Arizona Free Enterprise Club here in Arizona and financially contribute to support our type of activities. But we're not the only one. We would encourage everyone to get behind local, real groups here in Arizona. We have to make sure that the left has counterweights and that there's counterweight conservative organizations to support. And then secondly, the big one is this idea of just federal tax dollars supporting this NGO network is only half the story. State governmental entities are giving money to these very same NGOs to fund left-wing activity here in Arizona, whether it be our state government, but also our municipal, our county governments. They also give grants and provide funding to liberal NGOs that then turn around and engage in political activity. And that is one of the actions that needs to be cut off. We need to stop sending our tax dollars to fund NGO activity or NGOs that are going around and engaging in political activity, whether it be lobbying, whether it be litigating, whether it be engaging in political activity at the ballot box, supporting ballot measures, doing get out the vote efforts. Our tax dollars should not be going to NGOs funding that type of activity here in Arizona.
Well, unfortunately, Tucson's the blueprint for that. I have a hard news break at the bottom. Can you stay on just a little bit longer, or do you have to go?
Kathleen, actually, I do have to head to another meeting.
Okay.
But would love to come back on at another time, talk to you about this report in more length.
It's absolutely. Scot Mussi from Arizona Free Enterprise, thank you so much. And you guys, you need to get this report. You need to support them. We need to take that from 15,000 to 30,000 active people paying attention to this next election. You are listening to WINN Tucson on 1030 The Voice, your trusted local news and talk. We'll be back right after this news break. Don't go anywhere.